What if the most dangerous person you ever meet isn't someone else, but yourself? Not the version of you that the world sees, smiling, polite, careful, but the version buried under silence, restraint, and years of quiet endurance. The one who has seen betrayal yet kept their composure. The one who has been underestimated, dismissed, ignored, and instead of breaking, learned to listen, learned to wait, learned to move in shadows. We like to think danger is loud, that it comes with flashing teeth, raised voices, and fists pounding on tables. But true danger is calm. It is the man or woman who no longer needs to explain themselves, who no longer seeks permission, who no longer fights battles of ego. The most dangerous personality type isn't the aggressor, the manipulator, or even the tyrant. It is the individual who has been forced to confront the depths of themselves and come back with nothing left to fear. Because when you have walked through fire and realized you cannot be burned, what can the world do to you anymore? We live in a society that has taught us to mistake noise for significance. The louder someone speaks, the more we assume they must know what they're talking about. The more aggressive their body language, the more we think they must be powerful. The more they flaunt wealth, status, or beauty, the more we assume they must be winning at life. This conditioning runs deep. It starts in childhood classrooms where the loudest voices dominate discussions, carries into workplaces where confidence is measured by how quickly you interrupt, and echoes in social media feeds where attention goes to whoever shouts the boldest claim. Yet beneath that noise, most of these individuals are fragile, clinging desperately to the mask they've constructed. The misconception here is not just external. It seeps into us, making us believe we too must posture, project, and pretend in order to survive. And in doing so, we overlook the quiet ones, the observers, the people who, in their stillness, are absorbing, calculating, and preparing in ways the noisy never even notice. Machiavelli wrote that appearances often matter more than reality, but he also knew appearances could betray the truth. A prince who rules by fear, for example, may appear strong but is secretly weak, for he lives at the mercy of his image. If the illusion cracks, so does his control. What is rarely discussed is how exhausting this performance is. Those who thrive on dominance must constantly feed the beast of perception. Like actors trapped on a stage that never goes dark. They cannot rest because to rest is to be forgotten. They cannot show vulnerability because vulnerability is equated with weakness. This is the prison of the so-called powerful. They have built an empire on sand, one that must be tirelessly guarded against collapse. True danger does not live there. It lives in the ones who realize they do not need to perform at all, the ones who step off the stage, who refuse to play the endless game of appearances, who are willing to walk away even if it means obscurity, because they have something much stronger than reputation. The dangerous misconception is believing strength comes from the domination of others. That to be powerful, one must bend people, manipulate them, outsmart them, crush them in competition. This idea has been sold to us by history, by politics, by corporate ambition. But domination always comes with dependency. The tyrant depends on the obedience of his subjects. The manipulator depends on the naivety of his victims. The competitor depends on the recognition of an opponent. Remove the audience, and the show collapses. True danger lies in those who need nothing from the outside world to confirm who they are. They can interact, they can lead, they can inspire, but they do not cling. This is what unsettles others. When a person cannot be bribed by praise or destroyed by rejection, they are beyond control. It is not ruthlessness that makes them powerful, but detachment from the false currencies society worships. Consider how the culture of insecurity feeds this misconception. Marketing tells you that you are incomplete unless you buy more, hustle harder, or achieve bigger. Social platforms amplify comparison until you are addicted to proving yourself against others. In such a world, the dangerous personality is not the one competing more aggressively, it is the one who stops competing altogether. Imagine a person who no longer believes the metrics of likes, promotions, or applause define their worth. Imagine how threatening they appear to those still enslaved by it. They cannot be manipulated by envy because they have chosen not to envy. They cannot be rushed into decisions because they have learned patience. They cannot be blackmailed with loneliness because solitude no longer scares them. They have removed the hooks society uses to control, and in that removal lies the quiet danger of complete independence. Philosophers often warned of this quiet kind of strength, though it rarely receives attention. Nietzsche spoke of the individual who creates their own values, not from rebellion against others, but from an internal compass. That kind of person is feared, not because they impose themselves, but because they expose the fragility of those who need the crowd. When someone operates outside the script, when they refuse to be baited into the usual ego-driven conflicts, it confuses people. How do you fight someone who won't fight back? How do you control someone who doesn't want what you have to offer? This is where the misconception unravels. Society teaches us to fear those who dominate, but it is those who refuse domination entirely who hold the real danger. They disrupt the very foundation upon which manipulative systems rest. Think of the workplace, the family gathering, or the classroom. The one who shouts is rarely the one with the most influence. Influence is not always seen in the moment. It reveals itself in who is remembered after the noise fades. The dangerous personality is the one who has listened deeply, who has spoken rarely, and who, when they finally do speak, shifts the entire direction of the conversation. People confuse absence of noise with absence of power, but often it is the opposite. A single measured sentence from someone who has mastered silence carries more weight than hours of chatter from those addicted to hearing themselves speak. The misconception that power equals visibility blinds us to the real dynamics at play. The most dangerous people are invisible until they choose not to be, and when they emerge, it is not to seek attention, but to shift reality itself. Ultimately, the conflict is between the illusion of power and the substance of it. The illusion is loud, restless, and desperate to be acknowledged. The substance is calm, steady, and indifferent to acknowledgement. The illusion keeps you on edge, always proving, always defending. The substance removes the need to prove at all, and while the world invests in creating louder illusions, more posturing leaders, more self-proclaimed experts, more curated facades, there will always exist a few who quietly free themselves from the entire game. They do not announce themselves, they do not need recognition, but they carry an unsettling weight wherever they go. They are the dangerous ones, not because they threaten others, but because their very existence exposes the emptiness of the masks everyone else is wearing. There comes a moment in every person's life when the world feels like it has conspired against them. It might be the betrayal of a friend you trusted with your soul, or the rejection from someone you thought would stand by your side. It might be the humiliation of failure when everyone was watching, or the silence after pouring your heart into something that no one seemed to care about. These moments do not just hurt, they redefine how you see yourself. They press against the fragile walls of your self-push until they crack. At first it feels unbearable. You replay the conversations, the mistakes, the way people looked at you. You ask questions that never find answers, and yet buried within these moments is a strange gift. If you survive them without running, without numbing, without pretending, they plant the first seed of transformation, the seed that whispers, maybe there is more strength in standing still with your pain than in constantly hiding from it. We have all experienced the loneliness of realizing no one is coming to rescue us. Childhood convinces us that someone always will. A parent, a teacher, a friend. But adulthood strips away that illusion with ruthless precision. You discover that sometimes, when everything collapses, people step back instead of forward. Sometimes they judge, sometimes they gossip, sometimes they simply look away. And in those nights when your phone does not ring and your messages remain unread, you learn a painful truth. Survival is up to you. That realization burns at first, because it means the world is colder than you believed. But over time, it reshapes you. You begin to understand that self-reliance is not about building walls. It is about discovering that you have always had within you the power to stand. This is not the strength you imagined as a child. It is quieter, heavier, forged in isolation rather than applause. There is also the experience of rejection, which most people underestimate. Rejection is not just someone telling you no. It is the feeling that your very existence was not enough. A college application denied, a relationship ending abruptly, a job you wanted slipping through your fingers. These moments pierce deeply because they strike at identity. But here is the paradox. Rejection, over time, becomes one of the greatest teachers of detachment. When you are rejected enough, you begin to notice something. Life continues. The sun rises again. The world does not collapse, even though you felt it should. And slowly a realization dawns. Maybe the problem was never your worth, but the belief that your worth was tied to acceptance. That shift is monumental. It is the beginning of no longer needing external validation to confirm what you already are. Rejection ceases to destroy you because it no longer defines you. Failure works in much the same way. The first time you fail, it feels like the end of your story. We are conditioned to believe failure is shameful, a stain you cannot wash away. But if you live long enough, you discover that failure is not an ending. It is a repeated invitation. Every failure becomes a mirror, forcing you to decide, will you break under its weight, or will you build something new from its rubble? Those who become dangerous are the ones who stop fearing failure altogether. They realize that each collapse clears away illusions, each mistake strips them of unnecessary pride, each misstep forces them to deepen their resolve. The world may laugh at failure, but failure, paradoxically, frees you. It teaches you that you can be reduced to ashes and still rise again, and once you know that, the opinions of others lose their chains over you. Even more relatable is the slow erosion of seeking to be understood. At some point, you exhaust yourself trying to explain your heart to people who are not capable of hearing it. You try to justify your choices, your dreams, your feelings, and in return, you are met with blank stares, dismissive shrugs, or worse, judgment disguised as advice. After years of this cycle, something inside you shifts. You stop wasting your breath. You stop offering pieces of yourself to those who cannot hold them. This silence, though born from disappointment, becomes power. When you stop explaining yourself, you reclaim your energy. You realize you do not need the world to sign off on your identity. That is the moment you begin walking differently. Not because you feel superior, but because you have accepted that your path does not require an audience. There is also the awakening that comes when you recognize how society thrives on your insecurity. Look around. Advertisements prey on your sense of inadequacy, social media amplifies your fears of not measuring up, and even casual conversations are often competitions masked as banter. Once you notice this, it is impossible to unsee. You begin to understand that the loneliness, the rejection, the failure, the misunderstandings, they were never just personal tragedy. They were necessary disruptions, tearing you away from the grip of a system designed to keep you small. This is why those who endure hardship often emerge with a strange glow in their eyes. They have seen the trap and stepped out of it. They are no longer hungry for validation because they have tasted the emptiness of chasing it. That realization unsettles people who are still trapped inside the game. And perhaps the most profound, relatable experience is the moment you realize you have changed. It often happens in silence. You encounter a situation that would have once shattered you, and suddenly it does not. The insult doesn't sting. The rejection doesn't wound. The solitude doesn't terrify. You pause, almost startled by your own reaction. That is transformation. It is not dramatic, not cinematic. It is subtle, invisible to the world, but undeniable to you. This realization is both liberating and frightening. Liberating because you finally understand your strength, frightening because you know you will never fit back into the mold you once lived in. From here on, your life is different. You are different, and the world, sensing this difference, will not know how to handle you. That in itself is the essence of quiet danger. There comes a time when silence becomes more powerful than words, not the silence of suppression, but the silence of knowing. It is the silence of someone who has argued enough, defended enough, justified enough, and finally understood that explanation is not necessary. This silence is unsettling, because it carries weight. It is not empty. It is full of presence. People feel it before they even realize it. When you enter a room with this kind of silence, conversations shift, tones soften, and attention lingers without anyone knowing why. This is the awakening that follows pain. The recognition that you do not have to fight every battle, that your very being has become a kind of answer. It is the strength of restraint, of choosing not to be dragged into chaos, of standing in stillness while others lose themselves in noise. That is where real danger lies, the danger of someone who no longer seeks victory because they have already found peace. Inner strength is often misunderstood. It is not bravado, not toughness, not the denial of pain. It is the exact opposite, the acceptance of pain, the willingness to sit with it without running. Those who have walked through suffering and stayed long enough to feel its full weight emerge with a kind of quiet gravity. They carry scars not as proof of defeat, but as proof of survival. And when you see someone who wears their scars openly without shame or bitterness, you realize they have crossed into a realm beyond ordinary strength. They no longer need to prove themselves through aggression because they know what they can endure. They no longer fear loss because they have already lost and lived. This strength is not about appearances. It is about endurance, about the kind of foundation that cannot be shaken no matter how hard the storm presses. The awakening often comes in solitude. People fear being alone because they confuse it with abandonment. But solitude, when embraced, becomes a sanctuary. It strips away the distractions of the world and forces you to meet yourself fully. At first, this meeting feels uncomfortable. You see your regrets, your flaws, your vulnerabilities with piercing clarity. But as the days pass, you realize something miraculous. You are still here. You are still breathing, still capable of thought, still capable of creating meaning even in the quiet. This realization plants a seed of independence that grows into unshakable confidence. When you no longer fear your own company, you stop depending on others to fill the silence. You begin to see relationships not as crutches, but as choices. And that shift changes everything. It turns solitude into strength and strength into freedom. Light becomes a metaphor for this inner awakening. Not the blinding spotlight of fame or attention, but the steady glow of a lantern in darkness. It does not announce itself. It does not overwhelm, but it guides. A person who has awakened in this way carries that light within them. They can walk into the darkest situations, betrayal, failure, loneliness, and still find their way through. Others feel drawn to this light without understanding why. It is not charisma, not charm, not manipulation. It is authenticity. It is the quiet presence of someone who has faced their shadows and still chooses to stand. This light cannot be dimmed by external forces because it does not come from them. It comes from the core, from the place within that has been tested and proven unbreakable. That is why it is so dangerous. It is a light that cannot be controlled, only respected. Awakening also reveals itself in how you respond to conflict. Before, you may have reacted with anger, defensiveness, or desperation to prove your point. But now, with inner strength, you respond with patience. Not because you are passive, but because you understand that most battles are illusions designed to drain your energy. You see how people project their insecurities, how they bait others into games of ego, and instead of being pulled in, you step aside. You choose not to participate. This does not mean you are weak. It means you have elevated yourself above the level where those games are played. This kind of restraint frustrates people because they cannot control you. They cannot predict you. They cannot win against you because you have already refused the battlefield. This is awakening, when your power is defined not by how loudly you fight, but by how calmly you refuse to. The scars you carry transform this awakening. Where once you may have tried to hide them, you now realize they are your most valuable teachers. They remind you of where you have been, of the pain you endured, of the lessons you learned. Each scar is a story of survival, and together they create a map of resilience. People may pity your wounds, but you know better. They are proof of your strength, and when you no longer hide them, you send an unspoken message to the world. I have been broken and rebuilt, and I do not fear breaking again. This terrifies those who rely on intimidation, because intimidation only works on those who fear being hurt. But when you no longer fear pain, when you have made peace with your scars, you become untouchable. Ultimately, awakening feels like stepping into a new dimension of life. The noise of the world, the comparisons, the competition, the desperate chase for validation, fades into the background. You still hear it, but it no longer grips you. You walk through the same world, but you see it differently. Where others see chaos, you see patterns. Where others see weakness, you see resilience. Where others seek approval, you stand rooted in your own truth. This shift does not make you louder, it makes you quieter. It does not make you harsher, it makes you calmer. Yet in that calmness, people sense something dangerous. You cannot be manipulated, you cannot be bribed, you cannot be broken by the same illusions that control everyone else. You have awakened, and that awakening is the purest, rarest form of strength. There comes a moment when you realize that the search for validation has been the chain around your neck all along. You chased approval in classrooms, in friendships, in relationships, in careers. You shaped yourself into the version of acceptable that others would applaud, and yet the applause never lasted. It always faded, leaving you hungry again, desperate again, empty again. And then one day you grow tired of this cycle. You wake up and feel the exhaustion in your bones. Not just physical exhaustion, but spiritual. You realize that the pursuit of validation is an endless road with no destination. That realization is painful, but it is also liberating, because once you see the futility of seeking constant approval, you open the door to a new path, the path of self-recognition. It is quieter, lonelier, and infinitely harder, but it is also the only path that leads to freedom. The revolution you've been waiting for does not come from changing governments, switching careers, or finding the right partner. Those may bring moments of joy or struggle, but they do not create the transformation you long for. The true revolution is inward. It is when you finally decide that your worth cannot be negotiated or diminished by the world around you. It is when you stop bargaining with yourself, stop lowering your value to fit into spaces too small for you, stop sacrificing your truth for temporary acceptance. This inner revolution feels subtle at first. There is no trumpet sound, no grand announcement. But over time, it rewires you completely. You begin to act differently, not because you're trying to prove a point, but because you no longer need to. Your strength is no longer reactive, it is foundational. And here is the paradox. When you no longer seek validation, people begin to sense a new kind of presence within you. They notice your calmness, your refusal to be baited, your ability to walk away without bitterness. It unsettles them, because most people live in fear of being ignored, excluded, or rejected. You, however, move differently. You are not cold. You can still love, still care, still connect. But you do not cling. You give freely, and you walk freely. That combination is magnetic, even dangerous, because it disrupts the script people have relied on. They cannot control you with guilt. They cannot lure you with promises. They cannot destroy you with absence. You have stopped playing the game altogether, and that makes you untouchable. It is not dominance you radiate, but freedom, and freedom is the most terrifying form of power. When you reach this state, life itself begins to look different. You no longer measure your days by how many people approved of you, how many achievements you displayed, or how much recognition you received. Instead, you begin to measure life by depth. How present you felt, how aligned you were with your values, how peacefully you slept at night knowing you betrayed no part of yourself. This shift is subtle to the outside world, but monumental within. It creates a foundation of peace that cannot be bought or stolen. Even in hardship, even in loss, you carry this peace like a hidden fortress. Others may crumble when their image is attacked or their validation removed, but you remain steady. That steadiness is not visible on a stage, but it radiates in every interaction, every silence, every decision. It is the revolution that society cannot sell to you, because it cannot package or monetize it. It is yours alone. This awakening also reveals a strange and quiet truth. You do not need to conquer the world to feel powerful. You do not need to be remembered by millions or to leave monuments in your name. Real power is simpler. It is the ability to live in alignment with yourself without apology, to walk through the world carrying your scars openly, your silence confidently, your solitude peacefully. To give love without expecting it back in equal measure, because you already carry love within you. To lose without shattering, because your identity was never tied to outcomes. In this truth, you realize that life has never been about controlling others. It has always been about mastering yourself, and that mastery does not scream. It whispers, it hums, it radiates quietly, but unmistakably, to those who are awake enough to see it. So as you step forward, remember this. The most dangerous personality type is not the tyrant, not the manipulator, not the one who shouts the loudest. It is the one who has outgrown the need for validation. It is the one who carries peace in the middle of chaos, silence in the middle of noise, and certainty in the middle of confusion. This kind of person changes the world not by force, but by example. They remind others that there is another way to live, a way not built on desperation, but on freedom. The call to action is not loud, it is silent, it is personal, it is within you. Transform yourself inwardly, and you will discover that the revolution you've been waiting for was never out there. It was always waiting here, in you, ready to unfold.